The wind never stops on the Mongolian steppe. It rolls endlessly over the grasslands, whispering through the wild thyme and sage, carrying with it the scent of rain and horse sweat, and the sound of the world before civilization ever learned to build walls. The horizon stretches forever, a thin, trembling line where earth and sky seem to blur into one. It's a place where the silence can be deafening, and the vastness itself can feel like a living thing. Out here, in this sea of grass, the people learned early that nothing stays still. The herds move, the seasons move, the stars shift. And so, they too learned to move, to follow, to hunt, to survive. This was the world that shaped the man who would one day set it aflame, Temüjin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan. But before there was an empire, before the cities burned and the Silk Roads trembled, there was only the steppe and the eternal struggle to stay alive. The 12th century was not a kind time for anyone living north of China. The Mongolian plateau was home to countless tribes, Naimans, Merkits, Katars, Karaites, and the Mongols themselves, all of them fierce, proud, and perpetually at war. These were not the wars of kings and treaties, but of blood feuds, stolen horses, and revenge carried across generations. Alliances were as fragile as spring ice. Today's brother-in-arms could be tomorrow's raider. And into this world, in the year 1162, somewhere near the banks of the Onan River, a child was born into the clan of the Temüjin. His father, Yasuke, was a minor chieftain. His mother, Hwalin, had been abducted from another tribe, a fact that would haunt their family forever. Temüjin's birth came with omens. According to legend, he was born holding a blood clot in his fist, a sign, they said, that he was destined for greatness, or violence, or both. The Mongols never saw much difference between the two. Temüjin's early life was the kind of brutal education that forges either steel or ash. His father was poisoned by a rival tribe when Temüjin was just 9 years old, leaving the family abandoned, starving, and hunted. The Mongols, ever pragmatic, followed strength, and without a strong father, Temüjin's family became prey. His mother gathered wild roots and fish to keep her children alive, and Temüjin grew up with hunger gnawing not just at his stomach, but at his soul. Hunger, as it turns out, is an excellent teacher. It teaches patience, it teaches ambition, and it teaches that pity has no place in the cold wind of the steppe. One story, maybe true, maybe not, but too good to leave out, tells of Temüjin killing his half-brother, Bekter, over a dispute about food. It was the first time he spilled blood, but not the last. Even as a boy, he learned what every Khan would come to understand, that to rule is to decide who eats and who starves. But fate has a strange sense of humor. Years later, the same Tatars who poisoned his father captured Temüjin and enslaved him. They put a wooden collar around his neck, a symbol of submission, and treated him as nothing more than property. It's hard to say what went through his mind then. Maybe rage, maybe despair, maybe that quiet, dangerous calm that only comes when you realize there's nothing left to lose. But one night, he escaped with the help of a sympathetic guard who risked his life to let the boy flee into the night. It said Temüjin hid in a river, his body submerged beneath the reeds as the searchers passed by. It's almost poetic, isn't it? A boy drowning in darkness, emerging reborn. The steppes answer to destiny itself. Freedom, however, was only the beginning. In the years that followed, Temüjin began to rebuild, slowly, painfully, and with the kind of patience only the steppe could teach. He found allies, starting with an old friend named Jamuka, a charismatic leader who shared his dreams of unity. Together, they rallied the scattered Mongol clans, fought raiders, and began to imagine something impossible, a world where the tribes would no longer devour one another.
But friendship in history is often the first casualty of ambition. As Temüjin's following grew, Jamuka began to see him less as a brother and more as a rival. The two would eventually face each other in battle, splitting the Mongol world in two, and the outcome would decide not just their fates, but the fate of half the planet. It's strange to think how quietly history sometimes begins. There's no grand proclamation, no orchestra, just a boy, an orphan, a slave, staring at the endless horizon and deciding that maybe, just maybe, he deserves more than this. Because that's the real origin of empire. Not gold, not armies, not divine right. Just one person who refuses to accept the world as it is. And out there, beneath a vast, unending sky, a boy named Temüjin began to dream.
The Mongol steppe doesn't forgive sentiment. It rewards strength, cunning, and the ability to survive the winter. Nothing more. Out here, brotherhood and betrayal are separated by little more than a gust of cold wind. For Temüjin and Jamuka, that line was about to be crossed. When they were young, they shared the bond of Onda, a blood brotherhood sacred among the steppe tribes. To be an Onda was to be closer than kin, to share loyalty until death. And for a while, they truly did. Together, they raided rival tribes, gathered followers, and dreamt of unity. But as more people began to whisper Temüjin's name, as more banners began to fly under his command, Jamuka's admiration curdled into resentment. Because of course it did. Temüjin wasn't just another warlord. He was something rarer, a man with vision. He didn't want endless cycles of revenge and raiding. He wanted order, discipline, a world where loyalty meant more than bloodline. To the old guard of the steppe, this was practically heresy. The Mongols were not a people of rules, they were a people of instinct and impulse. But Temüjin began to rewrite the code of the grasslands. He abolished the aristocratic privileges of the old tribal leaders. No longer would the nobility automatically rule by birth. Warriors would rise through merit, not lineage. Captured enemies could join him if they swore loyalty. It was revolutionary, shocking, and deeply offensive to men like Jamuka, who believed power was a birthright, not a prize. Temüjin's discipline led his army unlike anything the steppe had seen. He organized them into units of tens, hundreds, and thousands, called Arban, Zun, and Minghan. Each man was responsible for the others. Each knew his place, his task, his duty. It was an empire in waiting, disguised as a band of horsemen. Jamuka, meanwhile, gathered his own army, larger, more traditional, more chaotic. When the two finally met in battle around 1187, the steppe trembled. It was brother against brother, vision against tradition. The fighting raged for days, filling the air with the screams of horses and the smell of burning grass. Jamuka's forces outnumbered Temüjin's, but Temüjin's discipline, that strange, almost unnatural order, began to turn the tide. Still, fate wasn't ready to give him his victory yet. Jamuka eventually forced Temüjin to retreat, capturing some of his men. What he did next would define the horror of the steppe forever. He executed them by boiling them alive. It was an act so cruel, so deliberate, that it burned itself into Temüjin's memory, and somewhere deep in that memory, the seed of revenge began to grow.
After his defeat, Temüjin disappeared for a time. He wandered the steppes, gathered new followers, forged new alliances. But more importantly, he learned. He studied the politics of the tribes, understood the fears of the common herders, and realized something critical. That the Mongols didn't just need a ruler, they needed a reason. When he returned, he came not as a warlord, but as a unifier. He preached the dream of a single Mongol nation, one tribe under eternal blue heaven, free from the chaos of endless feuds. And somehow, impossibly, people listened. He forged an alliance with the powerful Togrul Khan, leader of the Kara'it tribe, who had once been a friend of his father. Together, they began to dominate the steppe. One by one, rival tribes fell or submitted. Some joined willingly, drawn by the charisma and order of Temüjin. Others were crushed and then absorbed, their survivors folded into his army. Either way, the Mongols were becoming one. Of course, the universe never allows ambition to go unchallenged. Temüjin's success alarmed the old powers of the steppe, especially Jamuka, who now saw his former Anda not just as a rival, but as a threat to the very fabric of the tribal world. Once again, they went to war. But this time, the balance had shifted. Temüjin's army was no longer a loose confederation of clans. It was a machine. Every rider carried a bow that could kill from hundreds of meters. Every man had spare horses, allowing them to move faster and farther than any army alive. Communication across the battlefield was done with flags, drums, and smoke signals. Primitive, but astonishingly effective. And perhaps most importantly, Temüjin enforced discipline with terrifying consistency. Desertion meant death. Cowardice meant death. But loyalty, true unwavering loyalty, was rewarded with protection, honor, and wealth. For a steppe herdsman used to chaos, this was something close to paradise. When they finally clashed again, Jamuka's army shattered under the precision of Temüjin's attack. His forces were scattered, his followers deserted him. Eventually, Jamuka was betrayed by his own men and brought before Temüjin. Now, imagine the scene. Two men who once swore eternal brotherhood, staring at each other across the gulf of fate. Jamuka, defeated but proud, asked for one final favor, that he be executed without spilling blood, the noble way. Temüjin granted it. Jamuka was strangled to death, silently, his body left unmarked. It was the end of an era. The last challenger of the old tribal world had fallen. With Jamuka gone, there was no one left to stand in Temüjin's way. One by one, the Mongol tribes came under his rule. Not through sheer terror, though there was plenty of that, but through the strange promise of stability. For the first time in centuries, the endless cycle of revenge began to break. In 1206, the Great Council of Tribal Chiefs, the Kurultai, met on the banks of the Onan River. Thousands of horsemen gathered, banners fluttering in the wind. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and anticipation. There, the chiefs raised Temüjin on a felt carpet and proclaimed him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The boy who had once hidden in the reeds to escape slavery now commanded the loyalty of all the steppes. It's one of those moments in history that almost feels too cinematic to be real. The vast sky stretching above, the sound of the wind carrying a new name across the grasslands. Genghis Khan. It didn't sound like a title, it sounded like thunder. He would soon turn his gaze beyond the steppe, to the south, where the mighty Jin dynasty of China ruled in splendor behind its walls. To the west, where the Khwarezmian Empire glittered with trade and arrogance. The world didn't know it yet, but it was about to feel the hooves of a storm that would never truly fade.
When the title Genghis Khan first echoed across the steppe in 1206, it was more than a name. It was a declaration. The tribes were one. The endless feuds were over. And the world, though it didn't know it yet, was about to become very small. The Mongols had united, and the steppe had gone quiet. But quiet never lasts long, because when Genghis looked south, he saw a wall, not metaphorically, but literally, the Great Wall of China, ancient and arrogant, snaking over the horizon like a stone dragon. Behind it lay the Jin dynasty, one of the most powerful empires on earth. The Jin were rich, sophisticated, and certain that the horsemen beyond their borders were nothing but barbarians, which, in fairness, they kind of were, but they were barbarians with a plan. And the thing about walls, they don't stop the wind. The Jin dynasty, ruling northern China, had grown complacent.
For generations, they had paid off the nomads, manipulated rival tribes, and assumed their stone fortresses made them untouchable. Genghis Khan took that as a personal challenge. In 1211, the Mongol horde descended from the steppe like a storm cloud. Contemporary chroniclers describe them as a black flood of riders, moving faster than anyone thought possible. Their horses were small, sturdy, and tireless. Each warrior kept several, switching mounts mid-battle so none would tire. The result was a kind of perpetual motion. Armies that should have taken weeks to arrive appeared in days. The Mongols were the embodiment of mobility, living tents, rolling cities, armies that dissolved into mist and reappeared on the other side of mountains. The Jin, in contrast, were built on walls and routines, bureaucracy, fortresses, hierarchy, all the things that collapse the moment someone refuses to play by the rules.
Now, Genghis wasn't just a warlord, he was an experimenter. His genius wasn't just in destruction, but adaptation. Every time he conquered a people, he didn't just take their land, he took their ideas. Chinese engineers, Persian siege masters, Muslim merchants, all were folded into the Mongol war machine. When the Mongols reached the Jin fortresses, they found walls so high even the wind seemed to stop. So Genghis brought fire. His armies used flaming catapults, battering rams, and eventually early forms of gunpowder bombs borrowed from Chinese alchemists who probably hadn't meant for their inventions to be used quite like that. As one chronicler put it, the Mongols stormed the cities like a plague of locusts, leaving only the echoes of screams behind. It's hard to imagine the fear, the ground trembling with hooves, the air thick with smoke and ash, the sky turning red as arrows fell like rain. And still, the Mongols kept moving, always moving. In 1215, they reached Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing, the beating heart of the Jin dynasty. The siege lasted for months. Starvation, disease, and terror ate away at the defenders until the city finally fell. What followed was, in typical Mongol fashion, horrifying. Zhongdu burned for days. Its streets ran black with soot and blood. Entire neighborhoods vanished into flame. And when the fire died down, Genghis Khan did something very on brand. He rebuilt. Because, unlike most conquerors, he didn't destroy for destruction's sake. He wanted the world to function. Under his rule, of course. He reopened trade routes, punished looters, and established a strict code of conduct, the Yasa. It was a kind of universal law, part moral code, part military regulation, part personal manifesto. It punished theft, adultery, betrayal, and arrogance. It enforced religious tolerance and demanded loyalty above all. It was oddly modern, ruthless, but organized. Like if a war god took a business management course.
By now, the world was starting to notice. The Jin had fallen, the steppe had gone silent, and Genghis Khan had done the unthinkable. He'd turned a loose confederation of herders into an empire of conquerors. But Genghis didn't stop at the Great Wall. His curiosity, or maybe his hunger, drove him farther west, into lands that had never even heard his name. Somewhere in those years, he began to see himself not just as a ruler, but as an instrument of heaven's will. The Mongols called it Tengri, the eternal blue sky. It wasn't a god, exactly. It was the force that watched all things, judged all men, and decided who would rule beneath its endless expanse. Genghis believed Tengri had chosen him. And, inconveniently for everyone else, he might have been right. By 1218, his empire stretched from the Pacific to the borders of Central Asia. But borders are such delicate things, more suggestions than rules, and the Mongols were not fond of suggestions. That year, Genghis Khan sent a delegation to the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast Persian state ruled by the ambitious Shah Muhammad II. He wanted trade, friendship, maybe a little flattery. The Shah, however, made the mistake of thinking he was Genghis Khan's equal. He wasn't. He arrested the Mongol envoys, then executed them. One was beheaded, another had molten silver poured into his ears, which, to be fair, sends a pretty clear diplomatic message. When word reached Genghis Khan, he didn't rage, he didn't shout. He simply said, "Mercy is for those who show mercy." Then he prepared the greatest punitive expedition in history. What followed was something the world still talks about in whispers: the Khwarezmian campaign. The Mongols crossed deserts thought impassable, split their armies into separate columns that somehow coordinated across thousands of miles and descended upon the cities of Central Asia like a divine punishment. Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench, names that once stood for wealth and learning, all fell. The chroniclers of the time could barely describe it. The earth was black with the hooves of their horses, and the rivers ran red, one wrote. When Genghis Khan entered Bukhara, he walked into the city's grand mosque, a sacred space, silent and terrified. He climbed to the pulpit and said to the trembling townspeople below, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Cold, precise, terrifying, and somehow completely sincere. The campaign ended in ashes. The Khwarezmian Empire was annihilated. Its cities became bones in the sand. And Genghis Khan's shadow now stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, the largest continuous empire in human history. Yet for all his brutality, there was a strange kind of order in his wake. The Mongols reopened the Silk Road, made travel safer than it had been in centuries, and connected the farthest corners of the known world from China to Persia, from Russia to India. Merchants, scholars, and emissaries could cross the vast empire under one rule, so long as they respected it. It was peace born of terror, but peace nonetheless. By the time the dust settled, even the most distant kingdoms whispered his name like a curse and a prayer. Genghis Khan, the scourge of God, the chosen of heaven, the horseman who turned the world inside out. But the story, as always, was not finished, because even empires forged by iron and fire must eventually face the one enemy no sword can kill: time.
By the time Genghis Khan turned his gaze toward the west, the world was already beginning to tremble. Word had spread of a man from the steppes, a conqueror who commanded armies that moved like shadows, who never slept, who spared neither king nor priest. But most dismissed it as legend. After all, what could a horseman from the edge of civilization truly do to an empire? The Khwarezmian Empire was the pride of Central Asia, a glittering realm of scholars, merchants, and mosques that shimmered in the desert sun. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, commanded cities whose walls rose like mountains and markets overflowing with silk and gold. In his eyes, Genghis was just another barbarian. Dangerous, perhaps, but distant. A mistake he wouldn't live long enough to correct. The spark that lit the fire was small. A single caravan, Mongol merchants seeking trade, was seized by one of the Shah's governors in the city of Otrar. The merchants were accused of espionage, imprisoned, and executed. Genghis, ever the pragmatist, didn't rush to war. He sent envoys demanding justice, asking for the governor to be punished. The Shah's reply was a masterpiece of arrogance. He killed the envoys too. That was it. The wind changed direction, and the eternal blue sky turned its eyes west. In the spring of 1219, Genghis Khan unleashed his wrath. His army, estimated at around 200,000 men, poured out of Mongolia and across the deserts of Central Asia like a living tide. But this wasn't a reckless invasion. It was a masterclass in strategy. He divided his forces into multiple columns, independent, fast-moving, and coordinated across impossible distances. Scouts went ahead for weeks, mapping rivers, food sources, and enemy fortresses. Every movement was calculated, every raid part of a larger rhythm. The Mongols didn't march blindly, they flowed. And when they reached the edge of the Khwarezmian lands, they didn't just attack, they dismantled. Their first target was Otrar, the city whose governor had killed the merchants. For 5 long months, the Mongols surrounded it. Siege engines, built by Chinese engineers, hurled stones and fire into its walls. When the city finally fell, Genghis made sure its punishment was memorable. The governor was executed in poetic symmetry, molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. Justice, Mongol style. From there, the hordes split. One army stormed Bukhara, the jewel of the Silk Road. The city's defenders fled at the sight of the Mongols, and soon Genghis himself entered its grand mosque, a conqueror standing in a place of worship, his boots echoing on sacred stone. The story goes that he looked down at the trembling citizens and said, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Then his men set the city ablaze. Bukhara was gone. Next came Samarkand, the Shah's proudest fortress, walls 20 meters high, guarded by tens of thousands. It held out for a few days, then its defenders defected. The city was taken. One by one, the Shah's jewels turned to ash.
The Shah fled westward, chased not just by the Mongols, but by the ghost of his collapsing empire. Genghis sent one of his greatest generals, Subutai, the venerable dog of war, to pursue him. Subutai was the perfect instrument for Genghis's vision. Disciplined, creative, terrifyingly intelligent, he and his fellow commander, Jebe, led a pursuit that became legendary, a chase across 5,000 kilometers through deserts, mountains, and foreign kingdoms. The Shah ran to the Caspian Sea, then to an island, where he finally died. Alone, hunted, and broken. The Mongols didn't even have to kill him. The wind did that for them. Meanwhile, the rest of the Mongol army tore through Persia like wildfire. Cities like Nishapur, Merv, and Herat were wiped from existence. Chronicles speak of pyramids of skulls built to mark their passing, grim monuments to Genghis's message, "Defy him, and you cease to exist." It's horrifying. And yet, in its own twisted way, it worked. Fear spread faster than his armies ever could. But what's remarkable about Genghis Khan isn't the destruction, it's what came after. Wherever he conquered, he built. He installed governors, reopened markets, and demanded taxes instead of tribute. He allowed local religions to flourish as long as they stayed out of politics. He protected merchants and travelers, punishing anyone who interfered with trade. It was as if he burned the old world to ashes just to forge a new one, a cleaner, crueler, more efficient version. Across his empire, a letter bearing the seal of Genghis Khan meant safe passage. A merchant could travel from the Yellow Sea to the Caspian with the same protection as a Mongol noble. Roads were cleared, bandits exterminated, bridges built. It was the birth of what historians later called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. A peace written in blood, but peace nonetheless. Still, even Genghis Khan couldn't escape the pull of mortality. By the mid-1220s, the Great Khan was aging. His body, worn by decades in the saddle, began to betray him. His sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui, were already maneuvering for power behind the scenes, and there were still battles left to fight. In 1226, Genghis turned his attention south again, to the Tongut Kingdom of Western Sha, a state that had once been his ally. When they dared to defy him, he responded the only way he knew how. He erased them from the map. The Tongut capital was destroyed so thoroughly that its exact location is still uncertain today. It was his final campaign. Somewhere during the fighting, perhaps from a fall off his horse, perhaps from illness, perhaps, as some Mongol legends whisper, from a wound inflicted by a captured princess, Genghis Khan was mortally injured.
He died in 1227, at the age of around 65. His final orders were simple. The Tongat kingdom must be destroyed, and his burial must remain a secret. And so, one summer night, the greatest conqueror in history vanished. His body was carried back to Mongolia by a small escort. The path of his funeral procession, it is said, was hidden by killing everyone who sought it, a grim kind of privacy. His tomb has never been found. No stone, no marker, no monument, only the endless wind of the steppe, whispering over an unmarked grave. It feels fitting, somehow. A man who conquered half the known world, buried like a ghost beneath the earth he ruled. When his horsemen returned to camp without him, they brought with them only silence. And under that eternal blue sky, the tribes wept for the man, for the empire, for the storm that had passed. But the empire did not die with him. His sons would take up his banner, riding farther west than he ever dreamed, to the gates of Europe itself.
When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the world didn't even know how to react. Half of Asia had been turned inside out, and yet there was no monument, no proclamation, no grand imperial funeral. Only rumors, whispers carried by traders and wanderers that the great Khan had fallen, and that the eternal blue sky had gone quiet. But the Mongols did not mourn long. Grief on the steppe is a private thing. The horses still needed tending, the world still needed conquering, and besides, Genghis had left instructions. The empire he built was to be divided among his sons, like slices of the horizon. His eldest, Jochi, would have ruled the western lands, but his relationship with his father had soured. Some whispered that Jochi wasn't truly Genghis's son, that he was born from Hoelan's abduction by another man before her marriage to Yasugai. It was a whisper Genghis never fully silenced. Jochi died before his father, leaving his lands to his sons, Batu and Orda. The next son, Chagatai, was fierce and proud, ruling Central Asia. The third, Egede, was chosen as the next great Khan, the one who would hold the empire together. And the youngest, Tului, was given Mongolia itself, the heart, the homeland, the sacred steppe. It sounds tidy when told like this. It wasn't. The empire that Genghis left was too large, too powerful, and too full of ambition to stay peaceful. And yet, for a while, under Ogede's leadership, the Mongols reached their greatest height. In 1229, a grand Kurultai was held, a council of chiefs, warriors, and princes. Under the open sky, Ogede was proclaimed Great Khan, inheriting his father's impossible task, to rule a world that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the mountains of Persia. Ogede was different from Genghis. He wasn't a field commander. He was an administrator, a builder, a man who preferred order to chaos. Under his reign, the Mongols built their first true capital, Karakorum, a city of palaces, temples, and markets rising from the center of the steppe. It was both magnificent and bizarre, a city where Buddhist monks, Muslim merchants, and Nestorian Christian priests could share a meal under one roof. Imagine it. Caravans from Persia unloading silk in a city surrounded by endless grass. Chinese artisans crafting bronze Buddhas for a pagan Khan. Envoys from Europe bowing before a ruler whose people still lived in tents. The Mongols had become something new. Not just conquerors, but architects of an empire that defied every definition. But peace, of course, was never really their thing. Ogede had inherited not just the empire, but his father's unfinished wars. And there were still corners of the world that hadn't yet felt the thunder of Mongol hooves. So he turned west, to the Rus principalities and the kingdoms of Europe. At the head of this expedition rode Genghis's grandson, Batu Khan, a quiet and calculating commander, and by his side, the legendary general Subutai, now gray with age, but still sharp as the steppe wind. Together, they led an army of roughly 150,000 riders into the heart of the West. They called it the Golden Horde, not because of treasure, but because of the color of their tents, which shimmered gold in the dawn light as they moved across the plains. And so, in 1236, the Golden Horde rode into Russia.
The Russian principalities were divided. Small kingdoms and city-states bickering endlessly, much like the Mongol tribes had once done. They never stood a chance. The Mongols swept through them like wildfire, burning Ryazan, Vladimir, and Suzdal to ashes. The cities, built of wood, went up like kindling. The survivors fled into the forests. In 1240, they reached Kiev, the ancient capital, once the glittering heart of Eastern Europe, a crossroads of trade and faith. When the Mongols came, the defenders fought bravely, but bravery doesn't stop arrows. The city fell in days. Its churches were looted, its people slaughtered. By the time the smoke cleared, Kiev was gone, a memory carved into ash. And still, the Golden Horde moved west. They crossed frozen rivers, snow swirling around their horses' hooves, banners snapping in the wind. To the Hungarians, Poles, and Germans, the Mongols seemed less like an army and more like a natural disaster, something elemental and unstoppable. In 1241, they invaded Hungary and Poland simultaneously. Subutais' strategy was pure genius. He split his forces into multiple wings, attacking on several fronts at once, confusing his enemies into paralysis. In Poland, at the Battle of Liegnitz, the Mongols crushed a coalition of European knights, an army of crusaders wearing chainmail and carrying holy banners. Chroniclers wrote that the Mongols filled sacks with their enemies' ears. It was a grisly trophy, but in Mongol logic, perfectly practical. Proof of victory, counted one ear at a time. Meanwhile, Subutai and Batu met the Hungarian army near the Sajo River. It was April 1241. The European knights charged, expecting the Mongols to flee, as steppe raiders often did. Instead, the Mongols feigned retreat, drew them into a trap, and annihilated them with encircling cavalry and a storm of arrows. The Battle of Mohi became one of the most devastating defeats in European history. By that summer, the road to Vienna lay open. The Mongols could have marched into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. And then, they stopped. The reason was almost anticlimactic. Word came from the east that Ögedei Khan had died. Mongol custom demanded that all princes return home for the Kurultai to choose the next great Khan. And so, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the Mongols vanished from Europe, their hooves fading into the horizon like a nightmare at dawn. To the Europeans, it felt like divine intervention. To the Mongols, it was simply bureaucracy. The Golden Horde returned to the steppes, leaving behind ruins, legends, and a Europe that would spend the next century wondering when the horsemen would return. Back in the east, the empire was showing cracks. The vast distances, the endless conquests, the competing sons and grandsons, all pulling in different directions. The unity Genghis had built through fear and charisma was dissolving into politics and suspicion. After Ögedei, power passed briefly to his son Guyuk, then to Monkey, one of Tolui's sons. Monkey restored stability for a time, even sending his brothers to expand the empire's frontiers. To the south, Hulagu Khan led a campaign into the Middle East, destroying the assassins of Alamut and toppling the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, an event so shocking that it said the Tigris River ran black with ink from the drowned libraries. And to the east, Kublai Khan, Monkey's ambitious brother, was beginning his own conquest of China itself. The Mongol story, it seemed, wasn't done. It was only evolving. But something essential was changing. The sons of the wolf, Genghis's heirs, no longer looked like nomads. They ruled from palaces, wore silk instead of leather, dined from golden bowls instead of saddlebags. The steppe was still sacred, but distant. The wind that once guided them now whispered through the halls of cities.
And with comfort comes the slow, inevitable erosion of the edge that once made them unstoppable. The Mongols were still fierce, but no longer hungry. And history, as it tends to do, was beginning to turn.
There's a saying whispered among old Mongol storytellers: "A wolf born among men forgets the taste of blood." When Kublai Khan rose to power, that's what some of the old warriors said. They admired him, yes, he was brilliant, calm, and wise, but they feared he'd grown too close to the world of walls, books, and incense, too Chinese, too civilized. Kublai didn't ride like his grandfather Genghis Khan. He didn't live in a tent or eat from a saddle. He studied philosophy, hosted scholars, and surrounded himself with advisors from Persia, Tibet, and China. He was a man who wanted to rule not just through conquest, but through culture. But before he could rule the world, he had to rule his family. After the death of Mongol Khan in 1259, the empire fell into chaos. Two brothers, Kublai and Erik Bokeh, both claimed the title of Great Khan. It was a civil war that tore through the heart of the empire. Kublai commanded the eastern armies, supported by the wealth and sophistication of China. Erik Bokeh held the traditionalists, the pure Mongol tribes who wanted to preserve the old ways. It was more than a war of succession. It was a war of identity. Was the Mongol Empire still a nomadic empire of riders and raiders? Or was it becoming a global dynasty, one that ruled cities, farmers, and scholars? In 1264, Kublai emerged victorious. He captured Erik Bokeh, ending the last great Kurultai of the united Mongol world. And with that, the empire of Genghis Khan split forever. Each branch went its own way. The Golden Horde ruled the Russian steppes and Eastern Europe. The Ilkhanate governed Persia. The Chagatai Khanate ruled Central Asia. And in the east, Kublai forged something entirely new, the Yuan dynasty of China. Beijing, or as the Mongols called it, Daidu, became Kublai's capital. It was the first time in history that all of China had been conquered and ruled by foreigners. To the Chinese, it was both astonishing and humiliating. To the Mongols, it was the fulfillment of Genghis Khan's dream. Imagine the sight. The great Khan dressed in silks embroidered with dragons, sitting on a throne carved from jade, court musicians playing melodies from Persia, Tibet, and Korea, monks debating theology while Persian astronomers charted the stars above the Forbidden City. Outside, caravans from every corner of Eurasia unloaded spices, glass, and silver at the markets of Khanbalig, the city of the Khan. This was the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. A strange and brilliant calm settled over the continents. For the first time in centuries, a traveler could journey from Venice to Beijing under one rule, one law, and one sky. And some did. The most famous of them was Marco Polo, a young Venetian merchant who arrived at Kublai's court around 1275. To Kublai, Polo was a curiosity. To Polo, Kublai was the world made flesh. He later wrote that the Khan's palace was so vast that it could hold 6,000 people dining at once, and that the Mongol postal system was so efficient it put Europe's kings to shame. Some historians doubt Polo's details, but it hardly matters. His stories carried the legend of Kublai back to Europe, painting him as the ruler of a near-mythic civilization, a world where nomads had become emperors.
But beneath the silks and pageantry, the empire was growing brittle. Kublai's rule was brilliant, but heavy. The Mongols had never learned how to govern the vast sedentary populations they had conquered. Taxes mounted. Famine and floods plagued the countryside. Corruption seeped into the bureaucracy. Kublai tried to balance Mongol and Chinese customs, but it pleased no one. To the Chinese, he was still a barbarian usurper. To the Mongols, he was a king who had forgotten the feel of the saddle. And then there were the wars, because of course, there were always more wars. In 1274 and again in 1281, Kublai launched massive invasions of Japan. the largest naval operations the world had ever seen. Tens of thousands of ships crossed the sea carrying Mongol, Korean, and Chinese soldiers. They brought thunder, gunpowder bombs, crossbows, and armored cavalry. But Japan had something the Mongols couldn't control: the weather. Both invasions were wrecked by typhoons, violent storms that shredded the fleets and dashed them against the coast. The Japanese called the storms kamikaze, divine wind, and to them it was proof that the gods themselves had saved Japan from the wrath of the Mongols. For Kublai, it was humiliation. For the empire, it was the beginning of exhaustion. Still, Kublai continued to rule, stubborn and proud, like an old wolf refusing to lie down. He was no longer the conqueror of worlds, but the manager of a vast and creaking machine. He surrounded himself with poets and courtiers, built canals and schools, and dreamed of eternal legacy. But the old fire, the one that had burned in Genghis, was fading. When Kublai died in 1294, the empire was the largest it had ever been, but it was also fractured beyond repair. The Great Khan's authority no longer meant much outside of China. The Western Khanates ignored his decrees. The old unity of the steppe was gone. Within less than a century, the Mongols would be driven out of China. The Ming dynasty would rise in their place, sweeping away their monuments and erasing their names from memory. And the steppe went quiet again. But not completely. Echoes of the Mongols still drifted through history. In Russia, Mongol rule shaped the foundations of the state that would one day become the Tsarist Empire. In China, the Yuan dynasty left behind systems of administration and trade that lasted long after the Mongols vanished. In Persia and Central Asia, Mongol blood mixed with local dynasties, giving rise to new cultures, new empires, new languages. Even Europe, far from the Mongol heartlands, learned from them about diplomacy, about trade, about the vast interconnected world beyond their horizon. The Mongols may have ruled with terror, but they connected humanity in ways no civilization had before. And perhaps that was Genghis's truest conquest. There's an old Mongol legend that when the Great Khan died, his horse was set loose across the steppe. Wherever it stopped, that's where he was buried. No one knows the spot. No one ever will. Maybe that's how it should be, because the Mongol Empire was never about monuments or cities. It was about movement, about the sound of hooves on the horizon, the wind in the grass, the dream of a man who believed he could bind the world under one sky.
The campfires have long gone cold. The hooves that once shook the earth are now only echoes in the dust. And yet, the Mongols never really disappeared. They dissolved into the bloodstream of history, invisible, but everywhere. From the banks of the Danube to the walls of Beijing, from the ruins of Baghdad to the snowy forests of Siberia, the world still bears their fingerprints. Everywhere the wind touches, it carries a trace of them. When you look at a modern map of Asia, the great patchwork of borders, languages, and nations, you're looking at the faint afterimage of a Mongol dream. Trade routes that once carried their banners became the Silk Roads of the modern age. Their postal relays, small, efficient outposts strung across continents, inspired the communication networks that would one day become global mail systems. Even ideas flowed in their wake. Gunpowder from China, medicine from Persia, astronomy from Baghdad, art from Byzantium, all mingled under Mongol protection. It was brutal globalization, but it was globalization all the same. And maybe that's the strange paradox of their legacy. The Mongols, destroyers of worlds, were also the architects of connection. They burned cities but opened roads. They killed millions, but built the first truly international age. History rarely offers us heroes or villains in neat packaging. It gives us people, flawed, relentless, sometimes magnificent, sometimes monstrous. And Genghis Khan was all of those things.
He began as a hunted boy, born into nothing, exiled and starving on the edge of the world. He died as the master of half the earth. And the world he left behind, fractured, bloody, magnificent, was forever changed by his will. If you listen closely to the wind across the steppe, you can almost hear it still. The whisper of hooves, the clash of banners, the low hum of 1,000 riders waiting for dawn. That's the thing about empires. They don't really vanish. They fade into stories. And those stories live in us, in our roads, our cities, our languages, our sense of how vast the world can be. Centuries after Genghis Khan, Western travelers still spoke his name with a kind of haunted awe. In some places, it meant terror, in others, glory, but everywhere it meant power, the raw, uncompromising force of will that could reshape civilizations. The Persians called him the Scourge of God, the Chinese called him the Great Founder, the Mongols simply called him the Khan. And perhaps that's the truest name of all. Not a conqueror, not a tyrant, not even a hero, just the Khan, the one who rides between heaven and earth, between legend and memory. If Genghis could see the world today, our planes tracing lines across the same skies his messengers once rode beneath, our cities standing where his armies marched, maybe he'd smile. Not because we've conquered more, but because we've kept moving. Because the world is still, in its way, a vast and restless steppe. In the end, the story of the Mongols isn't about war. It's about movement. It's about the idea that no boundary is permanent, no mountain unconquerable, no empire eternal. It's about what happens when human will meets the horizon and keeps going. The world they shaped was harsh, brilliant, and alive. And though the grass has grown over their graves, the wind still carries their song, soft, endless, and strangely familiar.